It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, I want to start with you. It seems that both of the Republicans and Democrats are pushing the envelope, so to speak, on their respective political fronts lately. The GOP in Texas has passed one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country's history, which forbids women from seeking abortions after 6 weeks. It also includes a provision that allows citizens to report on their neighbors if they are trying to seek out that medical procedure after those 6 weeks. And at the same time, the Democrats in Congress are attempting to pass a $3.5 trillion spending bill that many consider to be far more expensive and expansive than even Lyndon Johnson's historic Great Society programs in the 60s. Are these two bridges too far for most Americans?
Well, as the saying goes, we live in interesting times. I kind of reflect on this by thinking back to Ronald Reagan. And, he ran for president in 1980 with very strong convictions about a whole range of social issues, many of which are still being debated today. But when it came to governing, he focused on spending reduction, tax reduction, reducing the regulatory burden, strengthening defense. And while he never moved away from the issues, social issues that he cared about, he didn't make them front and center in the governing process. So we now seem to have, in both parties, a fair number of people, leaders included, who have decided not only to motivate the base through the political or policy positions they take, but they're also governing that way, or attempting to govern that way. Texas, it seems to me, is an approach that's not going to fare well with the courts, although I have no, inside knowledge. I just think it's going to be challenged, and I don't know that it will stand, but it's already attracted the attention of other conservative Republican governors who now want to, as they say, look closely at it and see what they can do in their own states. But these are not approaches that the mainstream of the American body politic is going to embrace. And so I think it becomes ever more problematic when you get to actual elections. If this is the platform on which you wish to run. On the Democratic side, and I obviously want to hear what Al has to say, but we're approaching what used to be kind of called the nanny state, the idea that we're going to provide benefits from birth to death to everybody is a little bit beyond what, again, I think the mainstream of Americans are thinking the government should do. I've been a little tough occasionally on Senator Manchin. Senator Manchin is clearly going to challenge within his own party an approach that many others are rushing to embrace. So this whole question of how you position yourself politically versus how you govern once elected, I think we're just in a new era where we seem to be trying to govern and motivate the bases at the same time. It's going to be hard to sort out, but it's going to get sorted out, I think, next year when these midterm elections come.
Al, I'd like to follow up with you.
I think what Craig said was interesting about the Reagan viewing, how you campaign and govern on social issues. But I think this really reflects that, to some degree, both parties really like big government for their friends, and and what they think are their most important supporters. I mean, the Republicans tend to focus on the cultural issues, on moral issues. In addition to the abortion law, the governor of Texas yesterday signed what I would consider a voter suppression law that was supposed to get rid of the 0 cases of fraud that happened in 2020 in Texas. Trump made this absolutely ridiculous statement about the removal of the Robert E. Lee statute. But they also, and this is a governing policy, like to help their friends who tend to be wealthy by cutting the tax code. Democrats sort of the mirror image. We like to spend and expand government. Craig calls it the nanny state. Getting to areas from preschool to college aid that we think are going to win both low income and middle class voters. For both parties, this sort of reflects a base strategy. They want to go to their most hardcore and loudest supporters. The problem is that in an election like we're going to have next year, that strategy won't help with and may even scare away the voters both parties most need if they're going to win the Congress. And those are swing voters in the suburbs, college educated. I noticed that an analysis yesterday that said college educated are going to be increased as a part of the electorate by 3% next year. And particularly on this abortion issue, it's going to really energize women. Republicans have short memories about 2018 and what happened in that election when they energized women. But the Democrats have to be careful about that too, because the spending issues and the so-called nanny state, welfare state, whatever you want to call it, and I say this as somebody incidentally who believes in an activist government, but that does tend to scare away those suburban voters as well. They worry about inflation and they worry about government waste. I remember in 1992, at one point, this was the high point of Craig's campaign in 92 and my low point in late May when Bill Clinton was running third to George Bush and Ross Perot. And he had just been through the New York primary, which is in Democratic circles, the primary where the base voters have the most clout and the sort of the old politics prevails, and he sort of lost his reform edge, and as a result, he dropped to third in the polls. And we had this meeting in Little Rock, and a number of his advisors on the progressive side just laid out all these programs that were going to win back the middle class by bribing them, in my word, bribe. And I finally said, this is stupid. You became the leading candidate because you were different than those Democrats that the voters had been voting against, and now you want to be just like them. And, so we sort of went back to our original New Democrat themes. So look, next year, there are going to be a lot of issues that are going to decide the election. And conventional wisdom is that the Republicans have got a big advantage. Historically, they should. And particularly now with Biden's approval ratings going down, there's nothing more important in a off-year election than having a president with a high approval rating. And now when his approval ratings in the mid-40s, we have a lot of work to do. I don't want to speak for the Republicans, but if we're going to do well, we've got to get Biden's approval ratings up. We've got to avoid doing things that drive swing voters into the Republican camp. Biden's going to speak today or tonight about COVID and how and I think asked for vaccine mandates for federal workers, among other things. I mean, he's got to get that under control. But on the spending side, it means that he's got to be much clearer on his priorities. First, we have to get that $1 trillion infrastructure bipartisan bill through. I hope we will get that. Pelosi promised to vote on the 27th of September. I hope we'll get that. Secondly, I think we've got to really outline clear priorities in the reconciliation bill and cut back a lot of the other stuff. And to me, from what we've seen in the last few days, few weeks, with all this incredible weather that's seen the West burn up and the East think we're Noah. I think the focus ought to be on those projects that really are going to deal with climate change. And I think he's got to cut back the rest of it, get a much more moderate sized bill. And so the reconciliation bill ought to be climate change, and important social investments, but cut back. And then he's got to do voting rights. And that would be a reasonable agenda to take. It's a formula that's most likely to have the country going in the right direction on election day. It's the moderate formula that I think most Democrats want. Well, that's what we said in the primaries last year. We didn't elect Bernie Sanders to be president. And now that he's chairman of the budget committee, we shouldn't take his policies because Democrats don't even support them for the most part. And we want to have an election that's more like 2018 than 2020.
Before we close up, there is another election taking place in California in a week. It's time for predictions. So we will have this all documented. But what's the fate of Gavin Newsom as we have 6 days left to decide his future?
I think he'll be kept in office. It seems to me it's really a bridge too far in California, with now people focusing on the election, to think that they're going to throw in the state of California, they're going to throw out Gavin Newsom and elect sort of a kook who's a supporter of Donald Trump as governor.
Craig, it only takes 50% of the vote to throw somebody out. It's independent who gets to be the replacement, right?
Well, that's true. And I think this is a case, as we've been discussing, where early on it looked like to many people that Governor Newsom was very, very vulnerable, and he's now fought his way back. But you have to ask yourself how he's done it. And in part, he's done it by tagging the Republican opposition with every issue that around the country that very conservative Republicans have been championing, which do not fit the situation in California with the California voters. So I think Republicans have made it more difficult to remove him from office, although frankly, I always found it hard to believe in the end that was going to happen. So yeah, I'm casting my lot with Governor Newsom at this point, remaining in office.
Well, there you have it. We'll have that documented for in the archives forever. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.